speakers who've come up today, for the organisers of such a wonderful conference, and to the people here who've attended it and made it such a great day. Because I feel that the anti-war movement, I think throughout Britain, is having a resurgence. It's having a resurgence because there is a surge going on in Iraq, because they are threatening Iran, because they are doing all those things. And I think it is of crucial importance that we see this campaign and this movement as the most important campaign and most important movement that we have today facing a government like Tony Blair's government. And I just wanted to respond to the speaker who spoke from the Glasgow Central Mosque when he said he'd like to thank everybody here for everything that they've done for the Muslim community. Well, there's a saying in Arabic, or I understand there's a saying in Arabic, because unfortunately I don't speak Arabic, which is, don't thank me for only doing my duty. And I think that it is our duty. To stand against racism. It is our duty to stand against war, and it is our duty to stand by the Muslim community. When people talk about the Muslim community in this country, they quite often forget the vast majority of Muslims who've come to live in Britain lived in countries which were occupied as part of the British Empire, where they were run from London as a colonial enterprise. And people there know what that meant for their industries, for the lack of resources that they had, for the poverty that many of them had to endure, which is why they had to come to this country in the first place. And they didn't expect to come here 40 or 50 or 60 years ago, and for their grandchildren and children to now be accused of being terrorists and extremists in the way that they are being treated. And it seems to me we had the talk the other day, Abu Bakr, the man who was arrested in the Birmingham raids and then released. Abu Bakr, who said that he thinks it's a police state for Muslims in this country. The day after he said that, there was a statement from Tony Blair, from Gordon Brown and from Jack Straw, all saying, not saying we're sorry we arrested you and broke into your house at the crack of dawn, we're sorry we held you for 7 days without trial. They didn't say any of those. They said, how dare he say there's a police state for Muslims in this country. Maybe it's a slightly extreme way of putting it, but certainly I think if I were a Muslim, particularly a young Muslim in this country, I would feel like it was a police state, whether or not it was. And you now have detention without trial for 28 days. This guy was only released because a magistrate said there is absolutely no evidence against him. You now have detention without trial, which is longer than virtually any other country in the world in the so-called democracies. In America, they can't hold people for more than 2 or 3 days without charging them. It is now one of the longest periods in the whole of Europe, and it is a shame and a disgrace that they do it. And when people talk about double standards, and this is one thing that makes people so cross about the attack on Muslims, when people talk about double standards, Osama Said put it very well earlier, you compare that case in Birmingham, the coverage of the shot, the lurid tales of somebody being kidnapped and beheaded, with the actual letter bombings which have been going on this week, aimed at the congestion charge and the people who collect speeding fines. You look at the way they covered that. The police thought it might be a disgruntled motorist who finally snapped. Now, wouldn't it be nice if they maybe talked about Muslims like that, disgruntled Muslims? Although, you might think that finally snapping after 655,000 dead in Iraq and tens of thousands dead is a bit more justifiable of snapping than when you get 3 points on your driver's license. But of course, this demonisation of the Muslims isn't just because they've suddenly decided they don't like Muslims. It's because there is a political fight going on here. When you invade other people's countries, when you bomb those countries which are largely Muslim countries, you have to demonise the people who oppose you. They demonise all of the anti-war movement. We now have a law that you can't demonstrate within a mile of the Westminster Parliament. How democratic is that when you talk about democracy and dictatorship? But they particularly want to demonise the Muslim community, and that is to cover up for the criminal behaviour that has been going on from our government and from the government of the United States, and actually all of the so-called international community which has backed them up at every stage along the way. I don't know if people saw that programme the other week on the telly, the trial of Tony Blair. Did anybody here see it? Well, it had a happy ending. The happy ending was him being driven off in a police van to face war crime charges in The Hague. Now, what I thought was really amazing about that, the same week that I think 40,000 people complained to Channel 4 about racism on Big Brother with Jane Goody and all those other people, I don't think there was a single complaint to Channel 4 about the trial of Tony Blair. Now, you know, you might think the Prime Minister, the sitting Prime Minister, still the Prime Minister just, despite the kind of lack of connection with reality that clearly is demonstrated every time you see him speak, you might think that might be cause for concern about people. How disrespectful. Nothing of the sort. So I guess most people think it's pretty much a fair cop. And it is pretty much a fair cop when you think what Tony Blair's been responsible for. You know, we have had, more than 5 years ago, as people have said, the war in Afghanistan. You know, the response to 9/11, the war on terror, wasn't something that people at the time said, isn't that a good idea? We said, when they invaded Afghanistan, you will create not one bin Laden, but thousands of bin Ladens. We said you will kill many people. You know they killed 10,000 Afghans during that war, but they said that was justified because they got rid of the Taliban and they would catch bin Laden. They haven't caught bin Laden, they didn't even catch Mullah Omar, who one eye escaped on a motorbike. Not very so much for American intelligence, you might say. They didn't do any of these things, but what they have done now in Afghanistan is that the Taliban is growing again. And I'll tell you why it's growing again. It's growing again because every time the British or the other European soldiers are up against a fight with the Taliban, what do? They phone up the Americans and say, will you bring your planes in? And when they bring their planes in, you read in the newspapers, we bombed 100 or 200 Taliban. Now, they don't mean 100 or 200 Taliban, they mean 100 or 200 Afghans. That's what they mean, and that is why the Afghan people are saying they're against their government, which backs the Americans, and they're against the war that is going on there. And then we have Iraq, the disaster of Iraq, where we have created so much of the civil strife that is going on. We set up an electoral system and a government which is based on sectarianism. And then we turn round and say, oh, these people are acting in a sectarian manner. We've encouraged them to act in a sectarian manner, and I believe the Americans and the British have done this deliberately in order to divide and rule and therefore justify their occupation. That's why the troops have to leave, and they have to leave now, because whatever the problems in Iraq, Britain and America cannot be part of the solution to the terrible problems that the Iraqis now face themselves. And they're still at it. We had the Baker Report, where every member of the establishment in America said, you have to talk to Iran and Syria, and you have to find a way of pulling the troops out. What did George Bush do? And the American people told them this. They voted overwhelmingly in November against the Republicans and against the war. And 500,000 of them demonstrated 2 weeks ago. We shouldn't forget that, although you don't see it in the news and the newspapers over here. What did George Bush do? He sent in another 21,000 people, and he says he's going to attack Iran. And there's one war